You walk into a meeting and someone criticizes your idea. The rational part of your brain knows it's just feedback, professional and impersonal, but your chest tightens, your hands go cold, and a wave of shame floods through you. You spend the next 3 hours replaying the exchange, dissecting your tone, searching for what you did wrong, constructing alternate versions where you sounded smarter, more confident, less vulnerable. Later, at home, your partner asks a simple question about dinner plans, and you snap with a force that shocks even you. They look hurt, confused. You apologize, but you don't understand it either. These moments feel random, disproportionate, inexplicable. They are not. They are echoes, precise, predictable transmissions from wounds carved decades ago, now running your adult decisions, relationships, and inner life without your conscious permission. The pattern shows up everywhere once you learn to see it. At work, you volunteer for every project, unable to say no, driven by an invisible compulsion to prove your worth. You work late, check emails at midnight, and feel a strange anxiety on weekends when there's nothing urgent to solve. You tell yourself it's ambition, but ambition feels different. It moves towards something desired, not away from something feared. In relationships, you read emotional cues with forensic precision, scanning your partner's face for signs of withdrawal or disappointment, calibrating your behavior in real time to avoid abandonment. You know their schedule, their moods, their triggers better than they do. You become an emotional weather station, constantly monitoring atmospheric pressure, bracing for the storm. In social settings, you either perform a version of yourself that exhausts you, charming, agreeable, endlessly accommodating, or you retreat entirely, convinced that your authentic presence is unacceptable. After gatherings, you replay conversations, analyzing what you said, how it landed, whether you were too much or not enough. The inner critic runs a post-mortem every time. You know these strategies are costly. You can feel the weight of constant vigilance, the fatigue of managing everyone's comfort, but your own. But the moment you try to act differently, say no, express a need, set a boundary, anxiety surges, and you revert. The adult mind rationalizes. I'm just being responsible. I'm naturally introverted. I care about excellence. But beneath the explanations, something older is speaking. A child who learned that love was conditional, that safety required hypervigilance, that certain emotions were punished while others earned approval. That child is still active, still making decisions, still running the system. And the dissonance becomes unbearable when you achieve what you thought you wanted: promotion, partnership, public recognition, and feel nothing, or worse, feel fraudulent. The external validation slides past the wound without touching it. You compare yourself to others who seem effortlessly content, who move through the world without this constant undercurrent of dread, and you wonder what's wrong with you. The answer is not pathology, it is adaptation. Every defensive pattern you carry was once a survival strategy, a brilliant solution to an impossible situation. The child who learned to anticipate a parent's mood swings developed exquisite emotional sensitivity, a radar system that could detect shifts in tone, posture, breathing. The one who withdrew to avoid punishment cultivated rich inner worlds, imagination, the capacity for solitude that later becomes the foundation for creative work. The one who performed to earn affection mastered social fluency, charm, the ability to read a room and adjust. These adaptations were not failures, they were feats of ingenuity under duress. The problem arises when the original context disappears, but the strategy persists, hardened into identity, now generating the very outcomes it was designed to prevent. You withdraw to protect yourself, and the withdrawal creates the isolation you feared. You overfunction to prove your worth, and the exhaustion makes you resent the very people you're trying to please. You monitor others to prevent abandonment, and the monitoring creates distance. The wound becomes self-perpetuating. The mechanism is developmental and precise. Between birth and roughly age 7, the brain is in a hyper-absorptive state, constructing core schemas about self, others, and the world based on relational input. Mirror neurons fire, limbic circuits attune, and the child internalizes not just explicit lessons, but the emotional texture of the caregiving environment. If caregivers are consistently attuned, responsive, and emotionally regulated, the child internalizes a model of the world as safe and of the self as worthy. Needs are met, emotions are validated, and the nervous system learns to return to baseline after stress. But if caregivers are unpredictable, dismissive, intrusive, or dysregulated, the child adapts by constructing compensatory strategies, fawning, freezing, fighting, or fleeing to maintain attachment and minimize threat. These strategies become implicit, encoded in the nervous system, activated below conscious awareness, experienced as truth rather than interpretation. By adulthood, they operate as automaticisms. You do not decide to people-please or to withdraw or to overfunction. These responses fire before decision-making cortical circuits engage. You feel the tightness in your chest before you recognize the trigger. You are already mid-reaction before you realize you are reacting. The specific wound dictates the specific pattern. A child who experienced emotional neglect, parents physically present but emotionally absent, distracted, or unresponsive, learns that needs are burdensome and internalizes self-sufficiency as virtue. By adulthood, this person struggles to ask for help, minimizes their own pain, and feels guilt when they need support. They pride themselves on independence, but underneath is a deep loneliness and the belief that no one would show up even if they asked. A child who was criticized for expressing anger learns to suppress that emotion entirely, fearing that anger makes them unlovable. By adulthood, anger does not disappear. It leaks out in passive aggression, sarcasm, or somatic symptoms like tension headaches and digestive issues. The body holds what the mind refuses to acknowledge. A child who was only valued for achievement, praised for grades, trophies, accomplishments, but ignored when they simply existed, learns to equate productivity with worthiness. By adulthood, rest feels like moral failure, and self-worth fluctuates with output. Vacation becomes anxious, retirement feels like death, and burnout is the inevitable endpoint. A child who was parentified, made responsible for a caregiver's emotional state, required to soothe a depressed mother or manage a volatile father, develops hypervigilance to others' moods and an attenuated sense of their own needs. By adulthood, they attract relationships that replicate the dynamic, partners who are emotionally dysregulated, needy, or unstable, and they compulsively caretake while their own needs go unmet. These are not abstract typologies. They are lived topographies of adaptation, each with characteristic emotional signatures, relational blind spots, and predictable breaking points. The person who learned early that expressing needs leads to rejection will experience a partner's simple request, "Can you pick up milk on the way home?" as an unbearable demand, triggering disproportionate resentment. The person who learned that love is conditional on performance will experience a project's failure as existential catastrophe, proof of unworthiness, even when the consequences are minor. The person who learned to read emotional subtext for survival will interpret a friend's distraction as rejection, spiraling into hours of rumination over an interaction that the friend doesn't remember. The wound does not generate proportional responses. It generates totalized ones. When activated, the wound does not say, "This situation resembles the past." It says, "This is the past, happening again, confirming what I always knew." The paradox is that the wound often contains the strength. The child who withdrew to survive developed capacity for solitude, introspection, and self-reliance, qualities essential for creative work, philosophical inquiry, and psychological resilience. The child who became hypervigilant developed empathy, intuition, and the ability to read subtext, skills that make for exceptional therapists, leaders, artists, and friends. The child who learned to perform developed charisma, adaptability, and social intelligence. The wound is not purely deficit. It is potential in distorted form, a compressed strength awaiting differentiation. The task is not to eradicate the adaptation, but to make it voluntary, to shift from automaticism to agency. This requires recognizing the pattern in real time, which is notoriously difficult because the pattern feels like reality. When you are in the grip of a childhood strategy, you do not experience it as a reaction. You experience the world as genuinely threatening, the other person as genuinely rejecting, your own needs as genuinely illegitimate. The conviction is total. Your nervous system is signaling danger, and the neocortex constructs a narrative to match the signal. This is why insight alone does not liberate. You can understand intellectually that your reaction is disproportionate, that the other person did not intend harm, that you are projecting the past onto the present, and still the reaction continues unabated. Knowledge without embodied counter-experience is inert. The first fracture in this totality often comes through relationship. When you meet someone who does not fit the expected template, who remains present when you withdraw, who does not exploit your overgiving, who expresses anger without abandoning you, who asks for your needs instead of assuming you have none, the mismatch creates cognitive dissonance. Your system predicts abandonment, the other stays. You brace for criticism, they respond with curiosity. You assume your anger will destroy the bond, they tolerate it and remain connected. The old pattern misfires, and in that gap, awareness can enter. But awareness alone is insufficient. Insight without practice is voyeurism. The intellectual understanding that your reaction is disproportionate does not stop the reaction. What stops it is repeated, embodied counter-experience, choosing a different response despite the anxiety, tolerating the discomfort, and discovering that the predicted catastrophe does not occur. This is neuroplastic rewriting, slowly, incrementally, convincing the nervous system that the old rules no longer apply. The wound was learned relationally, and it is unlearned relationally. Through deliberate, structured practice that creates new pathways. One reliable entry point is journaling structured around emotional triggers. When a disproportionate reaction arises, rage at a minor slight, despair at a small setback, panic at perceived criticism, pause and map it. Write the triggering event in concrete, factual terms. What was said? What was done? No interpretation. My boss said the report needed revisions. Not, my boss thinks I'm incompetent. Just the observable event. Then write the immediate emotional and somatic response. Chest tightness, heat rising in your face, nausea, impulse to flee or attack, dissociation, numbness. Name the sensations without judgment. Then ask, what meaning did I assign to this event? Often, the answer reveals a totalizing belief. They think I'm incompetent. I'm about to be abandoned. I'm fundamentally unworthy. I failed again. This belief is the wound speaking, and it operates as if it were fact. Now reverse the hypothesis. What if this event means nothing about my core worth? What if the other person's reaction is about their own state, their own stress, their own limitations, not an indictment of me? What if feedback is just information, not a verdict on my existence? This cognitive flexibility is not self-deception or positive thinking. It is perspective-taking, the recognition that your interpretive frame is one possibility among many, not the only truth. Finally, identify one small integrative action, something you can do within 24 hours that enacts the reversed hypothesis. If the wound says, don't ask for help, ask for help. If it says, withdraw to protect yourself, stay present for 5 more minutes. If it says, over-explain and apologize, say nothing and notice what happens. The action does not need to be large. It needs to be contrary to the automaticity, a small act of rebellion against the old rule. Another method is imaginal dialogue with the wounded part. This is not fantasy or distraction. It is targeted internal communication designed to reparent the exiled self. Find a quiet space and close your eyes. Visualize the child you once were at the age when the wound formed. Picture the setting. The house, the room, the light. Picture the clothing, the emotional atmosphere, the look on that child's face. Then speak to that child from your adult vantage, not with pity, which reinforces helplessness, but with acknowledgement and honoring. You learned to be invisible because visibility was dangerous. That was wise. It kept you safe. I see the intelligence in that choice. You did what you had to do, and it worked. This is not therapeutic cliché. It is the act of reparenting, offering the attunement and validation that were absent. Then listen. Let the child part respond. Often what emerges is grief that has been suppressed for decades, rage that was never allowed expression, longing for connection that was met with coldness. Let it surface without intervention, without trying to fix or soothe prematurely. Just witness. After the dialogue, enact a small honoring gesture within 24 hours, something that acknowledges the need the child part carried. If the child needed rest, rest. If the child needed to say no, say no. If the child needed to play without purpose, play. If the child needed to be held, hold yourself, or ask someone you trust for a hug. The gesture is symbolic, but symbols rearrange psychic architecture. They signal to the nervous system that the old rules are changing. Boundary setting is another practice zone, and for many, it is the most difficult. Most people with childhood wounds either have rigid boundaries, walling off intimacy entirely, refusing vulnerability, maintaining emotional distance, or collapsed boundaries, overextending, oversharing, unable to refuse, taking responsibility for others' emotions. Both are defenses against the same fear, that authentic need will be met with rejection. The skill is in finding the middle ground, boundaries that are firm but permeable, maintained without aggression or apology. Practice phrases that require no justification. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. I need to think about it. No. Just no, without explanation. The impulse will be to justify, to soften, to over-explain, to preemptively manage the other person's reaction. Resist that impulse. Deliver the boundary clearly. And then stop talking. After setting a boundary, conduct a brief self-audit. What did I feel before, during, and after? Anxiety, guilt, fear of retaliation, relief, empowerment. Did the other person's reaction match my catastrophic prediction? Often it does not. Often the response is neutral acceptance or mild disappointment that passes quickly. What does this reveal about my internalized rules? That boundaries do not destroy relationships, they clarify them. The people who respect your limits are the ones capable of real intimacy. The ones who react with anger, guilt-tripping, or manipulation were relating to your compliance, not to you. The boundary reveals the truth of the relationship. The fourth practice is a triad: scheduled solitude, one honest refusal, and one micro-connection. Schedule time alone without distraction. No phone, no task, no agenda, no entertainment. Just present. 30 minutes minimum. This is profoundly uncomfortable for those whose worth is tied to productivity, or whose alone time was associated with punishment or neglect. The impulse will be to fill the space, scroll, clean, plan, worry. Resist. Sit with the discomfort. It will pass, and what emerges beneath it is often clarity or grief or a sense of self that has been drowned out by constant stimulation. Next, identify one situation this week where you habitually say yes from fear or guilt and say no. Not with explanation or apology, just no. Observe the internal and external response. Notice the fear before you refuse, the guilt after, and then the slow realization that you survived, that the relationship did not end, that the world continued. Finally, initiate one brief moment of genuine connection. A conversation where you are not performing, not managing the other person's emotions, not angling for approval. Just present. Ask a real question and listen to the answer. Share something true without editing it for palatability. Let yourself be seen for 30 seconds. These 3 actions work in concert. Solitude teaches you that you are sufficient company. Refusal teaches you that you will not be annihilated. Connection teaches you that authenticity is survivable, even desirable. Over time, these practices create a subtle but unmistakable shift. The automaticism does not vanish. Old patterns remain accessible under stress, fatigue, illness, or threat. But you begin to catch them earlier, to feel the moment of activation and choose whether to follow or redirect. You notice the tightness in your chest and recognize it as the wound, not as present danger. You feel the impulse to withdraw and decide whether withdrawal serves you in this moment or whether it is reflex. This is the differentiation between the adaptive role and the authentic self. You learn that the role, the overachiever, the caretaker, the withdrawn observer, the charming performer, is a tool, not an identity. You can use it when it serves you and set it aside when it does not. This flexibility is the opposite of rigidity. It is not a new mask. It is the capacity to wear and remove masks consciously, to move between strategies without losing the sense of a continuous self beneath them. The wound does not disappear. It becomes integrated, a known feature of your psychological landscape, no longer running the system unconsciously, no longer mistaken for truth. What becomes possible is surprising. Relationships that were sources of chronic anxiety stabilize, not because the other person changes, but because you stop enacting the wound's predictions. You stop testing for abandonment, stop performing for approval, stop managing outcomes. The relationship breathes. Work that was driven by compulsion becomes chosen, and the quality often improves because it is no longer contaminated by the need to prove worth. You work because the work matters, not because you are afraid of being exposed as inadequate. Solitude that was unbearable becomes restorative. Emotions that were terrifying become information. Anger signals a boundary violation. Sadness signals loss. Fear signals risk. They are data, not verdicts. The internal critic, often a direct internalization of a caregiver's voice, loses its tyrannical power. You recognize it as one voice among many, not the arbiter of truth. You can thank it for trying to protect you and then proceed without its permission. This is not transcendence. It is the capacity to live from the center of your own experience rather than from the defensive perimeter. The child who adapted brilliantly to survive did not fail. The adult who carries those adaptations into mismatched contexts is not broken. The wound is not a flaw to be excised, but a chapter to be integrated. It shaped your sensitivity, your strengths, your way of seeing. It also constrained your freedom, narrowed your responses, and cost you connection. Both can be true. The wound shaped you. It does not have to define you. The echo will continue to sound under certain conditions: loss, uncertainty, perceived rejection. But you will learn to recognize it as an echo, not as present reality. That recognition is the hinge. And on the other side of that hinge is not perfection, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of choice. The wound was real. The adaptation was necessary. And now, slowly, you are learning to live as if neither is the whole story.